When I was standing in the kitchen, he came up behind me, taking me by the hips, and began to whisper something in my ear. I was shocked. How so? This is my son. What is going on between us? And maybe I will like it? My name is Jessica. I'm 45 years old, a mother of one, and a doctor by profession. My son, Nate, is 20 and works in delivery. Our family has always been idyllic, close-knit, loving, and supportive. We've shared everything, from the highs of life's successes to the lows of its challenges, but nothing could have prepared me for the storm that was about to hit us. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world seems to pause for a moment. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when Nate walked in. His presence was always a comfort, but something about tonight felt different. He leaned against the counter, watching me with an intensity that made my hands falter as I chopped vegetables. "Mom," he began, his voice steady but carrying a weight I couldn't quite place. "I need to talk to you." I looked up, meeting his gaze. His eyes, usually so familiar, held a spark of something I couldn't identify. "Of course, Nate. What's on your mind?" He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for what he was about to say. "It's about us. About how I feel about you." I paused, my heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean, Nate?" "I mean," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "that I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. "Nate, you don't mean that. You're my son. This is wrong. Is it?" he asked, stepping closer. "Because to me, it feels right. I've tried to ignore it, to push it down, but I can't anymore. You're all I think about." I shook my head, my hands trembling. "Nate, this isn't something we can talk about. It's not normal." "Normal?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "What's normal, Mom? Is it normal to feel this much for someone? To care this deeply? Because I do. For you." I turned away, focusing on the vegetables I'd been chopping. "Please, Nate, don't do this. Don't say these things." "I have to," he insisted, his voice urgent. "I can't keep pretending. I need you to understand the truth. It's been tearing me apart, keeping this inside." I felt his hand on my shoulder, warm and familiar, yet now it sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to face him, my eyes searching his for any sign that this was a joke, a mistake, but there was none. Only sincerity, raw and unfiltered. "Nate," I whispered, my voice breaking, "you're my son. This can't happen. It's not right." "But it doesn't feel wrong," he countered, his eyes pleading. "Please, just let me show you how much you mean to me." I shook my head again, more firmly this time. "No, Nate, I can't. It's not just about us. It's about everything else. The world, society, morality. This is something we can't ignore." He stepped back, his expression clouded with disappointment. "So that's it? You're just going to shut me down without even considering it?" "There's nothing to consider," I replied, my voice firm despite the turmoil inside me. "This is wrong, Nate, and deep down, you know it too." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and determination. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the kitchen. The days that followed were tense, the air between us thick with unspoken words. Nate and I avoided each other, dancing around the elephant in the room, but the tension only grew until one night I found myself standing outside his bedroom door, my hand poised to knock. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, but I knew I couldn't let this go on. I had to face it, head on. I knocked softly, and after a moment the door opened. Nate stood there, his eyes widening in surprise. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "About us." He stepped aside, allowing me to enter. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of a lamp casting shadows on the walls. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "Nate," I began, my voice wavering slightly. "I've been thinking about what you said, and I can't deny that I feel something too, but it's not right. It's not something we can act on." He sat down beside me, his eyes searching mine. "But why not? Why can't we just follow our hearts?" "Because the heart can be wrong," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because we're mother and son, Nate. There are lines we can't cross." "But what if those lines don't matter?" he asked, his voice filled with a quiet desperation. "What if all that matters is how we feel?" I looked at him, my heart breaking at the vulnerability in his eyes. "Nate, I don't know. I don't know what to do." He reached out, his hand resting on mine. Then let me show you. Let me prove to you that this is real, that we're real. I hesitated, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. But as I looked into his eyes, I felt something shift inside me, a longing I hadn't realized was there, a desire I couldn't deny. Nate, I whispered, my voice trembling. I don't know if I can. Just tonight, he said, his voice soft but insistent. Let me show you how much I love you, just for tonight. I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest, and as I felt his hand tighten around mine, I knew I couldn't say no. Okay, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Just tonight. He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that sent a shiver down my spine. And as I kissed him back, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. My heart raced as I pulled away from Nate's kiss, the weight of what we were about to do pressing down on me like a storm cloud. I could feel his eyes on me, searching, pleading, and I knew I was already in too deep. Just tonight, I told myself, though the words felt hollow even as they echoed in my mind. Mom, he murmured, his voice low and rough, the kind of tone that sent shivers down my spine. You don't have to be scared. I'll take care of you. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Nate, this is wrong. We shouldn't. It's not wrong, he interrupted, his hand cupping my cheek. His touch was warm, steady, and it made my resolve waver. It's just us. It's always been us. Don't you feel it too? I did. God help me. I did. I had felt it for months now, ever since he'd started looking at me differently, with a hunger that wasn't just the adoration of a son, it was something deeper, darker, and more consuming. And though I had tried to ignore it, to push it away, it had only grown stronger. I'm your mother, I whispered, my voice trembling. This isn't how it's supposed to be. Says who? He asked, his brow furrowing. Who gets to decide what's supposed to be and what's not? I love you, Mom. Not like a son, like a man. And I know you feel the same way. I shook my head, though my heart wasn't in the denial. Nate, please. This is too much. It's too fast. He took a step closer, his body so close to mine that I could feel the heat radiating off him. Then let's slow down, he said softly. But don't push me away. Not tonight. I closed my eyes, torn between the part of me that knew this was wrong and the part that wanted it, wanted him more than anything. When I opened them again, he was still there, his gaze steady, his expression achingly earnest. Okay, I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop it. But we go slow, just slow. He nodded, his lips curving into a small, relieved smile. Slow, he agreed. He reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine, and led me toward the bed. My legs felt like they might give out with every step, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. When we reached the edge of the bed, he turned to face me, his free hand brushing a strand of hair from my face. You're so beautiful, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I've always thought that. Ever since I was little, I've known you were the most beautiful woman in the world. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, and I blinked them away. Nate, I mean it, he said, his voice firm now. I love you, Mom, not just because you're my mother, because of who you are, because of how strong you are, how kind, how perfect. I shook my head, my cheeks flushing. I'm not perfect. You are to me. His words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning, and I felt my resolve crumbling. He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss so gentle it made my chest ache. When he pulled away, his eyes were dark, filled with a longing that mirrored my own. Let me show you, he whispered. Let me show you how much you mean to me. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with doubts and fears, but then I nodded, the motion small but decisive. Okay, I said again, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, a slow, sweet smile that made my heart skip a beat. Then he leaned in again, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that was deeper, more urgent than the last. I felt his hands slide around my waist, pulling me closer, and I let myself melt into him, my own hands tangling in his hair. The kiss went on, each moment stretching into eternity, and I felt myself losing control of the situation and of myself. My body was responding to him in ways it shouldn't, my desire growing with every touch, every caress. Nate, I murmured against his lips, the name sounding foreign on my tongue, like I was saying it for the first time. Jessica, he whispered back, his voice rough, and the sound of my name in his mouth sent a thrill through me. He broke the kiss, his hands moving to the hem of my blouse. Can I? He asked, his eyes searching mine for permission. I hesitated for a moment, my breath catching in my throat. Then I nodded, the motion barely perceptible. Yes, I whispered. He smiled again, that slow, sweet smile that made my heart ache. And then he began to unbutton my blouse, his fingers moving with a practiced ease that belied his inexperience. When the last button was undone, he pushed the fabric aside, his hand sliding over my skin, sending shivers down my spine. "You're so beautiful," he murmured again, his voice filled with awe as his eyes raked over my body. I felt my cheeks flush, but I didn't look away. Instead, I reached for the hem of his shirt, my fingers trembling as I pulled it over his head. His chest was lean and muscular, his skin warm under my touch, and I felt a surge of desire so strong it nearly took my breath away. "You're beautiful too," I whispered, my voice shaky. He smiled, a soft, tender smile that made my chest ache. Then he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was almost painfully gentle. "I love you," he whispered against my lips. "I've always loved you." "I love you too," I whispered back, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Nate," I whispered, my voice shaky. "We should." "I know," he murmured, his lips brushing against mine. "We'll go slow, I promise." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest as he guided me down onto the bed. He lay down beside me, his body warm and solid against mine, and we began to explore each other in a way that was both familiar and entirely new. His hands moved over my body with a reverence that made my heart ache, and I responded in kind, my own hands tracing the contours of his skin, memorizing every curve, every ridge. When we were both bare, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was almost painfully gentle. "Are you sure?" he whispered, his voice filled with uncertainty. I hesitated for a moment, my heart racing. Then I nodded, the motion small but decisive. "Yes," I whispered, "I'm sure." He smiled, a slow, sweet smile that made my heart ache, and then he leaned in, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that was deeper, more urgent than the last. I felt his body move over mine, his weight pressing me into the mattress, and I let myself melt into him, my hands tangling in his hair as we became one in a way that was as inevitable as it was forbidden. "Jessica," he whispered against my lips, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you." "I love you too," I whispered back, the words slipping out before I could stop them. And as we moved together, our bodies entwined in a dance that was as old as time itself, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting soft stripes across the rumpled sheets. I lay there, my body still humming with the memory of last night, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. What have I done? The question echoed in my mind, but there was no regret, no guilt, only a deep, simmering longing that I couldn't deny. Nate's arm was draped over me, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm against my back. His warmth was intoxicating, and I found myself pressing closer, craving the connection we had shared. He stirred, his fingers brushing against my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. He shifted, his lips brushing against my shoulder, and I felt a flutter of desire stir within me. "Morning," I replied softly, my voice barely above a whisper. I turned to face him, my eyes meeting his, those piercing blue eyes that had always held a depth far beyond his years. They were filled with something now, something raw, something real, love. The word echoed in my mind, and I knew it was true. What we had was more than just a fleeting moment of passion. It was something deeper, something that had been building for years. "Last night," he began, his voice trailing off as if he wasn't sure how to continue, "was amazing," I finished for him, my hand reaching up to cup his cheek. His skin was warm beneath my touch, and I could feel the slight stubble that had begun to form overnight. "But what does this mean, Nate? What are we doing?" He searched my eyes, his expression serious. "It means we're finally being honest with each other. It means we're finally letting ourselves feel what we've both been hiding for so long." He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a tender kiss. "I don't want to hide anymore, Jessica. I want to be with you, really be with you." His words sent a thrill through me, but there was still a part of me that hesitated. What about everything else? The world? The people around us? They'll never understand. "I don't care," he said fiercely, his hand tightening around mine. "All I care about is you. You're all that matters to me." I could feel the walls around my heart crumbling, the weight of my fears and doubts slowly lifting. He was right. We had been hiding for so long, denying what we both felt. But now we were free. And it was terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly irresistible. I began, my voice trembling. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, Nate. What we're doing, it's not just about us. It's about everything else too. You are strong enough, he said, his voice filled with conviction. Stronger than anyone I know. And you're not alone in this, Jessica. We're in this together. His words were like a balm to my soul, soothing the fears that had been gnawing at me. I wanted to believe him, to trust that we could make this work. But there was still a part of me that feared the consequences, the judgment that would inevitably come. I'm scared, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He pulled me closer, his arms wrapping around me in a protective embrace. I know, he murmured against my hair, but we'll figure it out together. I nodded, my face buried in his chest, inhaling the scent of him, a mixture of sweat, soap, and something uniquely Nate. It was a scent that had always comforted me, even when he was just a boy. But now, it was different. It was intoxicating, stirring something primal within me. His hand slid down my back, his fingers tracing patterns on my skin, sending shivers of pleasure through me. I could feel the heat building between us, the tension that had been simmering since last night threatening to boil over. Nate, I whispered, my voice trembling with need. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine. Tell me what you want, Jessica. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of his gaze pressing down on me, but then I let go, allowing myself to be honest with him and with myself. I want you, I said, my voice firm despite the nervous flutter in my chest. A slow smile spread across his face, one that made my heart race and my stomach somersault. He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was both tender and urgent. His hands moved over me, exploring, claiming, as if he was trying to memorize every inch of my body. I responded in kind, my hands roaming over his chest, feeling the firm muscles beneath his skin. Our kisses deepened, became more frantic, more desperate. The world outside faded away, leaving only the two of us, lost in each other. His lips trailed down my neck, sucking lightly, sending bolts of pleasure through me. I arched into him, my body on fire, craving more. He moved lower, his mouth blazing a trail of kisses down my chest, pausing to lavish attention on my nipples, teasing them with his tongue until I was writhing beneath him. Nate, I moaned, my hands tangling in his hair, urging him on. He chuckled softly, the sound sending a shiver down my spine. Patience, he murmured against my skin, his breath hot against me. But patience was the last thing on my mind. I wanted him now, wanted to feel him inside me, filling me, completing me. I tugged at his boxers, pushing them down until he was free, his erection hard and throbbing against my thigh. He kicked off the rest of his clothes, his body pressing against mine, skin to skin. The feeling was electric, sending waves of desire crashing over me. He positioned himself between my legs, his eyes locking with mine, filled with a mixture of love and lust. Are you sure? He asked, his voice husky with need. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. Yes, I whispered, I'm sure. He entered me slowly, his movements gentle, giving me time to adjust. But soon, the passion between us took over, and our bodies moved together in a rhythm that was as old as time itself. My hands clung to him, my nails digging into his back as waves of pleasure washed over me. Jessica, he groaned, his voice filled with emotion. You're everything to me, and you're everything to me, I whispered back, my voice breaking with the intensity of my feelings. We moved together, our bodies perfectly in sync, as if we were made for each other. The world outside ceased to exist, and all that mattered was the connection between us, the love that bound us together. As we reached the peak of our passion, I felt a sense of completeness that I had never known before. In that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, because we were more than just mother and son. We were soulmates, bound by a love that was deeper than anyone could understand. And as we lay there, tangled in each other's arms, I knew that our journey was just beginning. My name is Jessica. I'm 45, a doctor, a mother, and now, something more, something I never imagined I would be. Nate, my son, my love, is 20, and our relationship has shifted into uncharted territory. The world outside these walls would never understand, but here, in this space we've created, it feels like the only truth that matters. This morning, I woke up tangled in his arms, his warm breath against my neck, his scent, clean, earthy, and undeniably him, had become both a comfort and a temptation. I lay there for a moment, my heart pounding as I remembered the night before. The way he'd looked at me, the way he'd touched me, the way he'd whispered my name like a prayer. It was all so wrong, yet it felt so right. "Mom, Jessica," Nate murmured, his voice still thick with sleep. His hand slid up my arm, sending shivers through me. "Are you okay?" I turned to face him, my eyes meeting his, those piercing blue eyes that had always been my undoing. I'm okay," I whispered, though the words felt inadequate. How could I explain the storm inside me, the guilt, the desire, the need that threatened to consume me every time he looked at me like that? He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss so soft it made my chest ache. "Good," he said, pulling back just enough to look at me, "because I can't stop thinking about you, about us." His words sent a jolt through me, and I felt the familiar tug of conflict. I wanted him, God, I wanted him, but the rational part of my mind screamed at me to stop, to pull away, to remember who we were. "Nate," I said, my voice trembling, we can't keep doing this. It's wrong." He didn't flinch. Instead, he cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle but unyielding. "Why? Because someone else says so? Because society tells us it's wrong? Jessica, I love you, not as my mom, but as the woman you are, and I know you feel the same." His words tore through me, unraveling the thin threads of resistance I'd been clinging to. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the truth was written in the way my body responded to him, in the way my heart raced whenever he was near. "I do," I admitted, my voice barely audible, "but that doesn't change the fact that this is complicated." He smiled then, a soft, understanding smile that made my heart ache even more. "Everything worth having is complicated," he said, "but I'm willing to fight for this, for us." "Are you?" I stared at him, my mind racing. Could I really do this? Could I really surrender to this forbidden love, knowing the consequences? Before I could answer, he leaned in again, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was anything but chaste. It was demanding, passionate, and full of promises I wasn't sure I was ready to make. But as his tongue brushed against mine, sending a wave of heat through me, I realized I didn't care. I kissed him back, my hands tangling in his hair as our bodies pressed together. His touch was electric, igniting a fire within me that I didn't want to, extinguish. "Nate," I gasped as his lips moved to my neck, trailing kisses along my skin. We have to be careful." He pulled back slightly, his eyes dark with desire. "I know," he said, his voice, "but right now, I just want to be with you, to show you how much you mean to me." And then his hands were everywhere, mapping every curve, every inch of me as if he was memorizing my body. His touch was both tender and possessive, and I felt myself melting under his caress. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. "Every part of you. I've never wanted anyone the way I want you." His words sent a shiver through me, and I felt my resolve crumbling. How could I deny him, deny us, when every fiber of my being was screaming for him? "Nate," I said, my voice trembling with need. I want this too. I want you." He didn't need any more encouragement. His hands moved with purpose, his touch igniting a fire that consumed us both. The world outside ceased to exist, and all that mattered was the connection between us, the love that bound us together. As we moved together, our bodies perfectly in sync, I felt a sense of completeness that I had never known before. In that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Because we were more than just mother and son. We were soulmates, bound by a love that was deeper than anyone could understand. And as we lay there, tangled in each other's arms, I knew that our journey was just beginning. Later that day, I found myself staring at him across the kitchen table as we shared a quiet breakfast. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, and I could feel the weight of everything we'd shared pressing down on me. "Jessica," he said, breaking the silence, "I know this isn't easy for you, but I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere." I looked at him, my heart swelling with a mixture of love and fear. "I know," I said softly, "and I meant what I said too. I love you, Nate." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "Then let's face this together. Whatever comes next, we'll handle it." His confidence was both comforting and terrifying. I wanted to believe him, to believe that we could make this work, but the world outside these walls wasn't kind to love like ours. "Nate," I said, my voice trembling, what if someone finds out? What if?" He cut me off, his grip tightening on my hand. "Then we'll deal with it. But I'm not hiding this. I'm not hiding us." His words were a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of fear. And in that moment, I made a decision. Okay, I whispered. Okay, let's do this together. He grinned, that boyish, charming grin that had always been my undoing. Together, he echoed, his voice filled with promise. And as we sat there, our hands intertwined, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could make this work. That night, as we lay in bed together, his arms wrapped tightly around me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known I was missing. Jessica, he murmured, his lips brushing against my ear. Thank you. For what? I asked, my voice soft. For trusting me, for letting me in. I turned to face him, my heart swelling with love. Nate, you've always been my world. He kissed me then, his lips soft and tender against mine. And as we moved together, our bodies entwined, I knew that this was where I was meant to be. Because no matter what the world thought, Nate was more than my son. He was my everything. And as we reached the peak of our passion, I felt a sense of completeness that I had never known before. Jessica, he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. I love you. I love you too, I whispered back. And in that moment, I knew that our journey was just beginning. I've always prided myself on being a woman of reason, of logic, a doctor, a mother, a protector. But here I was, lying in the arms of my son Nate, our bodies intertwined, our hearts beating in sync. The warmth of his skin against mine felt like a secret we'd stolen from the world, one that we'd have to guard with our lives. The scent of him was intoxicating, a mix of sweat, musk, and something uniquely him. It was a scent I'd known all his life, but this was different. It was deeper, darker, more primal. I'm your mother, I thought, my mind spiraling. This is wrong. This is so wrong. But my body didn't seem to care. My fingers traced the curve of his shoulder, and I felt him shiver beneath my touch. His eyes met mine, those piercing blue eyes that had always been so full of adoration, even when he was just a boy. Now, though, there was something else in them, a hunger, a need that mirrored my own. Nate, I whispered, my voice trembling, what are we doing? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss so soft it felt like a question. When he pulled back, his gaze was steady, unyielding. We're doing what feels right, Jessica, even if it's wrong. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that this couldn't happen, that we couldn't keep doing this, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself touching his face, tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the stubble that was still new to him. I can't stop thinking about you, I admitted, the confession slipping out before I could stop it. I try, but I can't. His hand slid down my back, pulling me closer until there was no space between us. Then don't stop, he murmured, his breath warm against my neck. Don't fight it anymore. For a moment, I thought about pushing him away. I thought about getting up, walking out of this room, and never looking back. But then his lips found mine again, and all rational thought disappeared. His kiss was hungry, desperate, and I matched his intensity, my hands tangling in his hair as I pulled him closer. We moved together, our bodies finding a rhythm that was as familiar as it was forbidden. His touch was electric, sending shivers down my spine as he explored every inch of me. I could feel the heat building between us, a fire that threatened to consume us both. And when we finally reached that peak, that moment of pure, unadulterated ecstasy, I felt something inside me break, or maybe it was something finally coming together. Afterward, we lay there in silence, the weight of what we'd done settling over us like a heavy blanket. I could hear the sound of his breathing, slow and steady, and I could feel the rise and fall of his chest against mine. It was peaceful, almost normal, but I knew that this was anything but. Jessica, he said after a while, his voice soft, hesitant. Yes? Do you regret it? I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't know. I should have regretted it. This was my son, for God's sake, but I didn't. Not in the way I thought I would. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace, like I'd finally found something I'd been searching for all along. No, I said finally, the word barely more than a whisper. I don't regret it. He smiled then, a slow, satisfied smile that made my heart ache. Neither do I. We stayed like that for a while, wrapped in each other's arms, lost in our own thought. But eventually, reality started to creep back in. The guilt, the fear, the knowledge that what we were doing was so very, very wrong. Nate, I said softly, breaking the silence. We can't keep doing this. He stiffened beside me, his body going tense. Why not? Because it's wrong, I said, the words feeling hollow even as I said them. Because I'm your mother, and you're my son. This isn't how it's supposed to be. He sat up then, his eyes searching mine. But what if it is? What if this is exactly how it's supposed to be? You said it yourself. You don't regret it, so why stop now? I shook my head, feeling the tears prick at the corners of of my eyes. Because it's not just about us, Nate. It's about the world, about what people would think. You're still so young. You have your whole life ahead of you. I won't be the reason you throw it all away. He reached out, his hand brushing against my cheek. You're not throwing anything away, Jessica. You're giving me something I've always wanted, something I've always needed. You. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt the tears spill over. Nate, I know it's wrong, he said, his voice firm now. I know it's not what society says we should do, but I don't care. I love you. Not as my mother, but as the woman you are, and I know you love me too. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that this was all just a mistake, a fleeting moment of weakness, but I couldn't, because he was right. I did love him, not just as his mother, but as a woman loves a man, and that terrified me. What are we going to do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled then, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. We're going to do whatever we want, because this is our life, Jessica, and we get to decide how we live it. I couldn't help but smile back, even as the tears continued to fall, because in that moment, I knew he was right. This was our life, our choice, and as wrong as it might be, it was ours. Okay, I said finally, my voice steady now. Okay. He leaned in then, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was both tender and possessive. And as I melted into him, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known I was missing. We stayed like that for a while, lost in each other, the rest of the world fading away. But eventually, we had to face reality. We had to figure out what this meant for us, for our lives. Jessica, he said softly, breaking the silence. I need you to promise me something. What? I asked, my heart skipping a beat. Promise me that no matter what happens, we'll face it together, that we'll never let anyone come between us. I promise, I whispered. His smile was slow, satisfied. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that this couldn't happen, that we couldn't keep doing this, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself touching his face, tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the stubble that was still new to him. I can't stop thinking about you, I admitted, the confession slipping out before I could stop it. I try, but I can't. He smiled then, a slow, satisfied smile that made my heart ache. Good, because I'm not letting you go. Not now, not ever. And with that, he pulled me close again, his lips finding mine in a kiss that was both a promise and a prayer. I knew then that there was no going back. This was it. This was us. And no matter what the world said, no matter what anyone thought, this was where I belonged. A moment later, Jessica, Yes, Nate, I whispered, my voice trembling. What is it? He looked at me then, his eyes burning with a fire that made my heart race. I need you. I need you more than anything. I was lost in his gaze. I could feel the heat building between us, a fire that threatened to consume us both. And when we finally reached that peak, that moment of pure, unadulterated ecstasy, I felt something inside me break, or maybe it was something finally coming together. He pulled me close again, his lips finding mine in a kiss that was both a promise and a prayer. I knew then that there was no going back. This was us. This was who we were together. No matter what the world said, this was where I belonged. I can't fight it anymore, I whispered, my voice breaking with emotion. I don't want to. Do you think I did the right thing as a mother? I really want your opinion.